Chris, it is awesome to see you. This has been a recording that has been out there for a long time. Back when you first launched your course, and remind me, what's the name of the course?
My course is called The Complete Guide to Selling on Video.
When you first launched The Complete Guide to Selling on Video, we talked about having you on the podcast, and then I failed to send the invitation, and here we are. What did you learn about publishing a course that you just didn't expect when you first published the course? What are some lessons learned about either the publishing process or getting the content out there? What'd you learn?
One, courses are harder to make than you'd think. So my videos on LinkedIn tend to be like a minute or two. The combined footage from all the lessons is about 2.5 hours of footage. So it's about as long as a Marvel movie. And it's me. So it's not just me sitting in front of a PowerPoint. I go deep in, like I'm showing you the process. I'm showing you. So sometimes there's multiple camera angles. Sometimes I'm talking and it cuts away so you can see how far away I'm sitting, which requires me shooting with 2 cameras. I go like deep on the editing process. And there's also comedy sketches in there. So every module ends with a comedy sketch that pulls you into the next lesson. So it took a couple months longer than I thought it would. So that's lesson number 1. Lesson number 2, a lot of people are going to tell you, dude, the second you release a course, I'm going to buy it. It might take a little longer for them to pull the trigger than you think. You know, you're expecting this giant rush of everybody is going to buy it. And then everyone's like, oh, I'll buy it eventually. And you realize you still got to go sell it. You still got to go do the sales. If anybody out there thinks a course is, quote, passive income, it is not. You have to sell it. And it's a nice thing to be able to sell. I have to promote it. Sometimes if I'm training a sales team, that will work that out as part of a package where they'll buy X amount of licenses so they can take the course. And then we do the training a month later. If you have specialized knowledge out there, a course is a wonderful idea. But yeah, it'll take you longer than you think it's going to take you.
So it will take you longer than you think it's going to take you. And not everybody who says they're going to buy it is going to buy it. So you have to sell. What's the third one? What'd I miss?
I don't know. See, people disagree about like what makes a good course, but my whole style of video is like, it's more immersive than what people are doing. And I've taken so many courses where the person teaching it is just in a little tiny bubble here in the corner of the screen.
Right.
And it's a very engaging PowerPoint. You can follow along, but I'm a big fan of like showing rather than telling. And that's what helps me. I like being able to see like, how is this person actually doing it? And I don't know. It's like people want to see you. And I think there's something to be said about making sure you're showing up and the shot looks good and you've got like a dynamic speaker actually interacting with the audience.
How did you get comfortable on video?
Ooh, that's a great question. So I guess there's a couple reasons why I was confident enough in my skills on video to like build an entire business around it. One is I've been on TV, right? So I've done some network television in my 20s, just being on a professional television set, mic'd up, you learn a lot. You learn like it's different performing in front of a camera than it is performing on a stage. On a stage where most salespeople are more comfortable presenting, you have to be very loud. You have to be very expressive. You have to be trying to make sure the people in the very back of the room can hear every single word you say. On camera video it's more subtle. The microphone is sensitive, so you can just speak at a regular volume. The HD camera is going to pick up all sorts of little tiny movements of the eyes and the mouth. So you can really do a lot more with less. So it was like I was on TV. So I learned a little bit there and I learned, okay, well, I guess I'm not so atrocious looking that like they wouldn't put me on TV. So that helped a lot. And I think a lot of people need a little burst of confidence to get out there. I've also done web series. More importantly, a lot of my close friends are professional content creators. So one of my best friends who I did comedy with for years in Chicago, he moved to Los Angeles early on. He was one of the early people at BuzzFeed when they were really kind of figuring out like what makes a video go viral. And then he ended up building like a multi-million-dollar content brand out there. And I was lucky enough to have him as a mentor and a coach because he's been doing things on YouTube and TikTok at a high level. And just having someone being like, hey, here's how to make your sound better. Here's how to make your thumbnails better. Like, here's some things you should understand about the YouTube algorithm. That was another thing where I just knew I have that very kind of specialized insight and most people don't get that kind of hands-on coaching. And then the third factor is I was doing sales when COVID happened, and I was just kind of getting on video by accident. I was selling education technology to universities at the time. And the three best ways to reach them were call their office, visit an educational conference, or visit them on campus. COVID struck. All my trips got canceled. They all left the office. None of them were at their office phone anymore. I got on video to as just a different way to get in front of them. And I quickly realized I was better at it than the sellers on my team who were better than me at selling and closing and outreach. They couldn't get 2 videos out in a month. I could get 25 out in an afternoon. And I would set 5 demos off of that. And I just looked around and I kind of had this moment where I was I never thought I was going to start a business, but I was like, oh my gosh, this is so powerful. And business schools don't know how to teach it yet. They're still kind of coming up, they're still experimenting with how to sell on video. So if I just start teaching it now, I start building now, I can, for the first time in my life, be ahead of the curve. And it was that combination of those 3 different things that taught me, okay, no, this is powerful enough where I could just throw myself completely into it. I've got a real kind of eclectic background that a lot of people in sales just don't have when it comes to video.
Why do people who are thinking about video struggle with asking for help? And this goes into the whole having access to a coach or a mentor that was able to help. And you had access to an industry, someone who knows their stuff in the industry. Why do you think people struggle asking for help?
Few reasons. One, there's not a lot of good people to ask for help. I see advice. I'm not going to name names here, but I see advice on LinkedIn about video, and it's just bad. It's bad. And again, it's the opposite things that I learned, these things where I'm oh, I learned being on TV that actually these little aspects of the performance are so important. I will go see people who've never done that, and they're giving the exact opposite advice on LinkedIn. And I think it must be very frustrating if you're talking to a coach and you're taking their advice and you're not getting results. That's what leads people to believe that the problem is just video, And I also think there's just some ego involved. If you're a person who's been selling at a high level for a long time and you've never needed video to hit your quota, you probably tried to make a couple videos. It took too much time. It didn't get the results you want. And you just go back to pounding the phones because you can. There's not really a desire to learn a new skill. But the ones who are trying to learn it, they'll get frustrated because they'll make a couple videos and it doesn't go well. And I try to explain to them, I'm like, look, if you're a cold calling master, it's not because you made 3 cold calls and all of a sudden you got it. That comes with experience. That comes with coaching. That comes from watching and learning from others who are doing it at a high level and who have a process for it. And of course your SDR didn't become a master of video in 2 weeks. There's more moving parts than a phone call. It's for video. For me, it's your performance on camera. It's also the lighting and the sound. I put subtitles into all my videos, so my videos are a reading experience. There's thumbnails. There is how are you going to title the video strategically so it lands in Gmail and LinkedIn? There's 20 different moving parts. And again, no one just comes out and explains this to you unless you hire me as a coach, because I explain this stuff, but it's a lot of guesswork. And, if there's 20 different things they're doing wrong, it's hard to focus in on what they're doing right and just improve on that, but normally what happens is somebody will send me a prospecting video and I tell them, you're doing too much. You're worrying about the screen share. You're worrying about you're giving them a product demo when they didn't even ask you for a product demo. Let's just get you and your relationship to the camera figured out. Let's start there and let's simplify the message. Let's challenge ourselves to do it in 30 seconds and make it really easy to respond to. And once you can do that, you can get clever with the tricks and the screen shares. But they're thinking 20 steps ahead. And I'm like, dude, you're not even looking at the camera correctly. We got to take a couple steps back before we can take steps forward.
I really like how you just highlighted the relationship with the camera. And I'll just share a personal story. The first time that I went out and I thought, okay, well, I'm going to go record a course. It took me 3 takes before I finally got comfortable sharing something. And the third one, I only got comfortable sharing because I was like, fuck it, I'm done. If I don't get this thing out, I'm not going anywhere. So I don't care how bad it is. I'm just going to go ahead and shoot it and share. And I remember getting the feedback from it about, oh, well, this is really bad, or this doesn't look like you, and all of this other kind of stuff. And I was like, fuck, did you know how hard it was for me to even do this? Right. And it's good to see Chris laughing, because like that was painful. It was all really good feedback, but it was painful to get because of the amount of time it took me to just get comfortable sharing anything. So I know there are other people that are out there struggling with it. I see you nodding your head.
Yeah.
First, why'd you laugh?
I laughed because everybody who's ever gotten good at video has gone through this same terrifying realization. For me, it was my friend in Los Angeles who, again, I started making some stuff and sending it to him. And he said what I needed to hear, which was like, this is good. You need to do more. And I was like, yeah. He's like, no. I mean, you need to do like hundreds of the, like and I'm like, at the time I had only made like 2 or 3 videos. And I'm like, oh, it took me so long to make those. And he's like, yeah, you're going to get faster and they're going to get better. And he also, this is going to terrify your audience. Sorry, anybody, you might want to sit down for this. If you're making like a YouTube video, right? YouTube cares a lot about the audience watching the whole thing. And every 10 seconds, you can lose your audience. Like if you ever watch my video content on LinkedIn, every moment pulls you into the next moment, because I know every 5 to 10 seconds, I could just lose them. And yeah, when I'm out there now, I'm thinking about it as a series of moments, but that realization that like, oh my God, something needs to change every 10 seconds. And he's like, yeah, maybe it's a sound effect. Maybe it's a different shot. Maybe it's text on screen. Maybe it's a change in emotion from the speaker. But yeah, you got to keep it changing and moving. But then it's like, at the time that sounded crazy to me. And now I look at my stuff and now that's just like how I think. I'm thinking of each moment beat by beat. And I train people to write in bullet points. I'm like, if you write in bullet points, you're going to hit the points that you want to hit, but you can still stay flexible enough where you're not like reading off a teleprompter. But yeah, that dread that like, oh my God, I'm never going to be able to do this. This was so hard. And it like, yeah, that is normal. Anybody who wants to put yourself out there, you're going to go through that progression. Nobody who does this well picked it up instantly. There's always a learning curve.
So, and when I say 3, that's like a lot of stuff happening before I felt comfortable saying, okay, here is the first version of what a recorded thing looks like, and then listening to it and watching it. Then the second version of what a recorded thing looks like and listening to it, watch it, and then getting to a third one where I put it out there. I really like the highlight on beats. And I want to get into where beats come from and the training that you've gone through on that side. A lot of feedback I'll get is, hey, you really need to script this stuff out. And it drives me nuts because I am not scripted. Now, I am kind of like one of those toys where you pull the string back and this blurb will come out multiple times. Speed to impact is more important than going fast. The importance of sales, looking at sales is connecting the dots between problems that are known and unknown and solutions that are known and unknown and all of that kind of stuff. Like that's natural. That feels much more natural. Those end up being the broader beats that help carry me along. So for someone who's not familiar with beats, what do you mean by beats?
Yeah. So again, I'm a sketch comedian by training, and I was always taught that comedy comes in 3s. Like thing 1, thing 2, thing 3. Some people say there's no explanation for that. I say there's a perfectly reasonable explanation for that. Thing 1 is you're introducing an idea. Thing 2 is you are introducing another idea, thus establishing a pattern. And then beat 3 is you subvert the pattern. You give the audience something other than what they expected. And that's the formula for comedy. And like a beat is just like, it's just a moment where something changes. Like if you think about it, like in music, you think about a metronome, the beat is just what is pumping along through the entire song. So literally taking a beat is just taking one moment to do whatever you need to do with it. But I am an improviser too. I've done a lot of like hundreds of improv shows. I also coach corporate improv workshops too. That's sometimes people just hire me to coach improv. And if you've ever seen a long form improv show in Chicago, basically you just get one word from the audience and you just go for like 30 or 40 minutes. You just come up, you're coming up with characters and scenes like as you go. and the improvisers are just editing on the sides. And whenever there's a beat, there's just a moment, there's an edit point where people will run out and start the next scene. And people would always ask me, like, how do the improvisers just know when that scene has come to the end? And I go, because the audience knows too. That beat, there is something about the timing where if you run out and cap the scene, the audience just claps because it just feels right. And if you miss the edit point, the audience can tell. If you've ever seen an improv show and somebody's about to wipe the scene and they hold themselves back, everybody knows that they just missed the beat. And now the energy of the scene starts dipping down. And now it's in trouble because you got to raise the energy. You got to get that big laugh to end the scene again. I guess that's my long-winded way of saying, like, the beat is just something we feel, but all communication, all storytelling has some kind of rhythm to it.
When you think about the rhythm and you think about these 10-second pieces and kind of drawing people in and designing, do you get into things like storyboarding when you're putting together video? Is that something that you think about?
A little bit. So it's like I am oftentimes recording comedy sketches that have another person. So like for my live stream, I have another person who's filming on their end. I write a sketch where they just deliver a couple lines into their phone. And these are all scripted out. I don't like storyboard them out like officially, but I have to have them broken up. So I know, okay, all the boss's lines, I got to get in front of the green screen. I got to do all those. Okay, now here's all of Veigman's lines. Here's all the desk lines. I have to have those pre-planned so I can be efficient in my shooting. So yeah, I would say like my sense of the beat is more as an editor. I'm always cutting things down. I can always feel when something's dragging. And usually there'll be a line or two that I just kind of cut down a little bit on. And yeah, in your case, if you're a person who doesn't like scripting things, what I tell people is vocal transcriptions are your friends. If you need to go just talk through the idea for a couple minutes, you can literally go to Google Docs and right next to the spell check, there is a tool called voice typing.
Okay.
And it allows you to just talk into your microphone. It just transcribes your words into a document. So I tell people, if you're not a person who can just sit down and write, let that be your first draft. Talk through the concept. Now you literally have the words on paper. Now you can go down, add the bullet points, cut out the unnecessary stuff. But like, it's very important, and it's always been very important to me as a writer to just get that first draft, as dirty as it is, like just get it out. And then I still like, I've got a stack of scratch paper that's like the size of the Bible because like I print everything out. And for me, it's helpful to be able to cross things out, draw arrows, write notes around there. Now when I'm going to go type up that script, I've got stuff there. I've got my notes. I can come in with like an editor's eye and just be like, okay, this is a video about whatever. Here's beat 1, here's beat 2, here's beat 3, and that's it. And I'm only trying to communicate one simple idea to the audience. And that's how my coaching goes too. I'm like, maybe it's one thing you want them to know. Maybe you want them to have one feeling. Maybe by the end of the video, you want them to feel something. Maybe it's a call to action. You want them to do something. But it's all like, okay, what's the one thing I want from the audience? Beat 1, beat 2, beat 3. Beat 3 should feel like it's all kind of wrapping up nicely in a bow. And then did you bring them somewhere else? They started here. By the end of the video, you want them to be here, whatever that means in whatever context you're making a video for.
I think it's pretty powerful as you're talking through this kind of progression and this transition. And we'll talk about it in the context of both sales and marketing and the importance of conversions. And when you're going in and saying, another idea to create a pattern and then take them someplace else, there's a conversion that's happening. The conversion's happening inside their mind. And at least what I'm getting from this conversation is in comedy, in video production, you can design for these conversions. Is that fair?
Yeah. And I think with marketing and comedy and this style of video, understanding what the audience expects is a crucial part of the equation.
Yeah.
It's like, I'm always out there and it's like, you think I'm about to give you this and I'm going to give you something else. And you're like, wait a minute, I thought he was going to do this. What is he doing here? And now I pulled you into the story. And that's really what you're doing with marketing. You're trying to set yourself apart. And you're like, I know. And this is stand-up comedy too. I did a lot of stand-up. Stand-up is, it's just you in front of an audience. And so you got to ask yourself, like, how do I see the world differently than everybody else. And that's stand-up comedy is very relatable, but I have this belief that like comedy exists in the gap between what we're supposed to feel and what we actually feel. And that's what a stand-up comedian is doing sometimes. They say, hey, I was in this very familiar situation. I know everybody says you're supposed to do this, but I usually do this other thing. And the audience laughs because they're like, oh, yeah, it's kind of what I do too. And there's that shared humanity in that. People are just like, oh, I thought that was just me. And yeah, that's what great marketing is too. It's being like, hey, you know how this thing about the world like doesn't really make sense? Well, like we see eye to eye on that. I think a lot about point of view, and that's a term I wish I heard marketers talk more about. But yeah, that's what I believe great marketing is. It's like, can you give that point of view in a way where people are kind of taken back and they're just kind of like, whoa, I thought I was the only one who thought this way. Okay, let's see where this is going.
How'd you get into stand-up?
So stand-up is one of those things where it was just like, honestly, the sad answer is all my friends moved to Los Angeles and I didn't think I was good enough to move with them. So it was like I always had my crew that I worked with. And I started having to figure out, like, what am I without the group? And so, yeah, I just started doing it, like little open mics and stuff like that. Admittedly, stand-up was probably what I spent the least amount of time doing. I've done a lot more improv and sketch comedy than I've done stand-up. But Chicago's an interesting town where it's like people come to Second City and they're like, where are all the celebrities? And I'm like, they're not celebrities yet. When people saw Chris Farley at the Second City back in the early 90s, they didn't say, oh, I just saw Chris Farley. They said, there was this huge guy who was just a maniac, and I can't even describe it, but it was the funniest thing I've ever seen. And I don't know if they're still going. I loved doing stand-up at this place called The Shithole, who was just an attic where they would have stand-ups come in, but it was really good. It was really tightly run. And sometimes they'd just be like, oh, ladies and gentlemen, just give it up for Bob Odenkirk. And Bob Odenkirk just shows up and does a set. And then the next stand-up goes. It's very much like a town where it's kind of laid back. And yeah, sometimes it's like, oh, Tina Fey's in town. She's just going to like jump into an improv show. And yeah, for me, stand-up, it's all about just like that point of view. I think stand-up also helped me learn, and this is kind of a sketch comedy thing too. The audience isn't like, if you want to push the envelope, and a lot of comedians do, they want to do like kind of outrageous, offensive stuff. That doesn't work unless the audience likes you. You have to get on their side early on. And again, it's demonstrating that shared understanding. They have to feel like, okay, this person on stage, I think they kind of get what I'm about. And there's a lot of parallels between comedy and sales. You know, at the end of the day, you're just trying to win over an audience. But that's the thing I practice too with like, if I'm teaching somebody how to do like cold calling or whatever, it's like they have to kind of like you before they're ever going to listen to your message. And a lot of that can just be curious about them. You know, what's the first thing comedians do when they step out on stage? They usually mention something about the city they're in. You know, they'll be like, oh, I'm in New York, finally got one of those bagels everybody keeps talking about. You're doing that to build this like shared understanding in real time. You know, and then, okay, you've given the audience, you've shown that like you're interested in them, you like their city, you're curious about their city, they're clapping about the things that are they feel ownership over. Now you can start your set. Now you can give them your take on the world. And maybe you're going to say things that are a little bit blue or a little bit, they're not expecting it, but it's like you've laid that groundwork of goodwill and you've shown that you're just here to help them have a good time.
Yeah, the phrase that is resonating for me or is going through my head as you're talking through this is you've earned the right. You've earned the right to be edgy. You've earned the right to ask the question. You earned the right to engage at a level that they didn't expect. And definitely parallels to what we do in sales. I think in any interaction that you have with people, just don't go in there and dump stuff on people right out of the gate. You've earned the right to ask a question or go a little bit deeper. You keep saying sketch comedy. What's the difference between sketch comedy and stand-up as an example?
So stand-up comedy is like a comedian with a microphone in front of an audience. Sketch comedy is like characters and situations. So more like Saturday Night Live. There's a million of them. I don't know why I can't think of any, but I grew up on like Kids in the Hall, Mr. Show.
Living Color wasn't in Living Color.
Yeah, in Living Color was sketch comedy. SCTV. So SCTV being Second City TV. So that was John Candy and Eugene Levy and that whole crew. Like, you're writing these satirical situations and you're exploring the comedy through characters and relationships. So Second City, where I learned to do it, Second City was founded in the 1950s. And it is a very classic style of sketch comedy. Like, for all the changes in the world, they still teach it pretty much the way they did in the 1950s, where it's like, here's a monologue scene, here's a relationship scene, here's a town hall scene, here's a fish out of water scene. And what they teach you in Chicago improv and sketch comedy is that you want to start with a real character and you want to lean into your real feelings and your real tendencies. And you want to take one aspect and just blow it up to comic proportions. And it's funny because a lot of the most famous characters from Saturday Night Live is like someone doing an impression of their dad. Mike Myers, Austin Powers. Austin Powers is just him doing an impression of his dad. His dad was British and like he's just trying to get that down. And I think of that all the time when I'm writing sketch comedy. And it really helps from a writing perspective because once you're like, oh, okay, I'm going to channel my dad's energy here. Then it stops being a question of like, what's the funniest thing on earth that I could say? And it's like, what would my dad say in this situation? And when you get that out there, the audience laughs because it feels familiar. Maybe that's how their dad talks too, but I'm not coming up with a caricature to mock. I am actually creating a character based on like real experiences that have happened to me. And again, like Vagueman is one of my characters that anybody who follows my LinkedIn content will know. It's me with a cape in front of a vague, like blurred background. And the joke is he just says really vague things. Like he is not specific about anything, but I try to channel that part of myself that doesn't want to say something because maybe I'm going to be wrong. That part of you that only uses really guarded, safe language because you think that's what other people want to hear. I try to channel that. Then I have Bospo, who is like me. It is a louder, angrier version of me. But oftentimes I'm channeling every sales boss I've ever had, who nothing you do is ever good enough for them. They're always pushing you harder no matter how well you did. And yeah, I'll just allow myself to be a more irritated version of myself, a person of me that's just doesn't have the time for niceties and is just more blunt. But again, it's like if you can mine your real feelings, you can create a character that ends up being a different version of you. And yeah, for sketch comedy, for me, oftentimes I was writing the show with a writing partner. So the two of us were writing together.
Okay.
And you write a few dozen sketches, you cut half of them, and then you audition a cast of actors and you hand the script to them. And these actors are going to be delivering the lines. And it's amazing because they find all these different comic moments that you never would have thought of. They make it their own. And it ends up, their performance takes on a life of its own, separate from whatever the writer initially came up with.
How has that experience helped you get better at preparing people to do better things with video?
Yeah, great question. I am a person who just sees people for their talents.
Okay.
Someone tells me, oh, I'm really boring. I say, no, you are a no nonsense character. If you're a little stiff and you're a little wooden, use that to your advantage. And that's what I would do in shows. I'd be like, oh, this woman has a very warm presence about her. So I'm going to cast her as the grandmother in this scene. And this guy's real kind of like, he's just got broad shoulders and a square jaw. So I'm going to cast him as the soldier. And when I'm coaching other creators, I try to look at their natural gifts. And it's like, I did sketch comedy for 15 years. So if I was not doing any comedy, I would not be using all of my gifts. Whereas if I'm working with somebody and they're a really good teacher, I say, okay, let's get you up on camera teaching. If you're a very thoughtful person, let's get you on camera being thoughtful. Maybe you've got stern dad energy. That's great. Go use it. And I'm a big fan of like, and when I coach a team of creators, which I do sometimes, companies will bring me in, I'll launch a team of creators. I call that ensemble training because that is multiple storytellers, one story. And it's like, you are all telling the story of this brand, but each of you has different gifts. You have different experiences. You have different skills. I was taught that effective marketing is giving yourself an unfair advantage. What can you do that other people just can't replicate? And that being a director for all those years has really helped me as a coach to be like, oh, this person, if you got them on camera doing that, that would be compelling. And yeah, that's also like, if you're a creator and you're nervous to get out there, you really need someone to tell you that too, to say, oh, that thing you just did, that's great. Let's go do that. Because oftentimes people are just kind of floundering around trying to figure out what the audience wants. To have someone be like, oh, that skill you have, let's just get that on camera. It takes a lot of the guesswork out of it.
So for someone who doesn't have that resource, or let's say they're not really open to the idea of the resource just yet, how can they go through? Is there a process that folks can go through to kind of figure out what their gifts are? There's some.
Yeah. So what I did, I literally wrote down a list of every time I was able to win in my life. You know, what was I doing? Sometimes I was doing sales, right? I was better at running a presentation than I was making 100 cold calls. So I'm like, okay, that's a skill. I have good presentational skills. The comedy, I knew I was winning there because I was getting the laughs. Pep band, I was in band. I stopped playing 15 years ago, but I'm like, you know what? I was having fun and I was first chair. And yeah, I'm going to pick an instrument back up because that's just a skill that I have. And I'm a good listener. So I'm going to have a show where I get to listen and be open to people. And yeah, I tell people, if you want, take an inventory of your life. And I'll work with coaching clients sometimes where I'm like, look, here's a woman who built a business. Anytime you want to go out there and speak from that experience, people will listen, right? You're a woman who's done something most people didn't do. You've been successful at it. You can come out here in your blazer. You can take a video in your office, and that's you. That's real. But you're not just that, right? You're a mother too. So maybe if you want to shoot a video in your kitchen or in your backyard or something, maybe that's just Lisa, the gal that people liked to be around growing up. That version of you that was in sports. Maybe it was the version of you that was the version of you at church, or the version of you. It's like people have all these different environments where they can actually be the real them. So I try to like literally make a list of what that is. And then the last thing I tell them, and this is the thing I tell literally every person who's ever hired me, I say, you do not know what good content is. I do not know what good content is. The audience is going to reveal that to us. Like, your job is to go out there regularly talking about the things you know from the point of view that is real. And you're going to watch your data. You're going to watch your analytics. You're going to track when something overperforms, because something eventually is going to overperform. You're going to make something and it's going to get more likes or get more comments or get more shares or engagement or whatever than usual. And that's when you get very curious. You say, what is it about this? Was it the topic? Was it the point of view? Maybe it's the style of video. Whatever it is, you did it and you got a bigger response than usual. And then it just became a game of like, how can we do more of this? How can we explore from this point of view more? This topic that the audience is interested, maybe we'll go a step deeper and we'll revisit that from a different angle. But it's like the hardest part is like, you gotta hold yourself accountable that you're going to start going out there. Maybe it's 1 video a week. Maybe it's 2 or 3. I know TikTokers who do 7 videos a day. I think that's insane. I usually put 2 to 4 videos out a week on LinkedIn, and that does pretty well for me. Whatever it is, you just got to start going out there consistently. And you've got to recognize that you and your audience are going to disagree sometimes. Sometimes you are going to work very hard and spend way too much time making a thing that you think is brilliant, and nobody's going to watch it. And then sometimes you're going to be behind your schedule and you're like, you know what? I'm just going to throw this 30-second thing out there because I'm busy and I don't have time to make a bit. And then that's the one that blows up. The audience doesn't care how hard you worked on it. They care about, did it resonate with them? And the more you put stuff out there, the more you can actually look and see, did it land or did it not land? But once you start getting some wins, it's a huge confidence builder, because now you know, okay, I can make high performing stuff. I can make stuff that a bigger audience enjoys. And yeah, then you just have to go do it constantly.
Can you get that feedback without doing anything?
No,
Right.
You have to go do it. That's the other thing too, where it's like, so I know, Mike, you're friends with Todd Clouser, right? I think I see you like interact with his stuff. I don't know. I like a lot of his perspectives on how he grows an audience. And I have a lot of commonality with him. I always say it's like, this is different than theater, and it's different than doing like a movie, because in theater, the audience is sitting down here and the performers are up here, right?
Okay.
There's no interaction between the two.
Yep.
The performers are performing, and then the audience sits there and claps, and that's the show.
Okay.
I'm an improviser. I come from a background where the audience and the performer, they are on the same level. You are getting suggestions from the audience, and the stuff the audience is giving you is affecting the show. And that's why anybody who's ever had a great time at an improv show is like, it was amazing. I couldn't even tell you what they did. I can't remember a single thing they said, but it was a great time. That's what I do with content too. And if I'm coaching like a cohort of content creators, let's say we're doing an 8-week progression.
Yeah.
That first week, we don't do any video. That first week, we always have the same assignment. I go, you are going to ask your audience one question and report back to the class. Maybe that's on LinkedIn, Twitter, and other platforms have polling functions in them as well.
Yep.
And yeah, it's the first thing I do is like, you are going to go out there, you are going to ask your audience about something that is important to them. And then you're going to come back and then we start making the videos. Because you can start that video by being like, hey, I polled my audience and I was surprised by what they said. But you're starting with something that they have emotional stakes in. And on a technical level, you are training the algorithm to deliver content to the audience that you want. Everybody who interacts with that question, and it's like, I ask poll questions all the time. I do this as part of my live stream. I do it as part of my content strategy. Sometimes my polls get like 800 responses or 1,200 responses. I'm like, oh my gosh, that is so much more engagement than I would have expected. If you ask an interesting question, and that's the thing, LinkedIners, I know what you do out there. You ask the obvious question. Should people who work hard get paid money? No, ask about something your audience, like that you don't know how the audience is going to answer. I try to ask about something that is like a genuine controversy or something that people are genuinely split on. And people will interact with the post, leave comments, they're going to give their input and stuff. A couple days later, when you roll the video out about that topic, who do you think is the most likely person to experience it? It's the people that interacted with your content a couple days ago based on a similar topic. They're the ones who are likely to see it. They're also the ones who are most likely to click the like button and leave the comment button. And by the way, if you want to edge that along, you can always just send it to them and be like, hey, thanks for engaging with the poll. I made a video about that. But look, you just created demand in real time. You just went, you asked a question, you got people interested, you delivered something for them to enjoy. And then you just sit back and say, how did it land? Did it blow up and all of a sudden it's exceeded your wildest expectations? Okay, do more stuff like that. Did it fail? Did nobody watch it? Okay, well, then we got to get curious about that. Did you pull them in the first couple seconds? Is the video well labeled? Is it well shot? Did it take too long to get to the point? Is this not actually an interesting topic? You got to get curious about that. But yeah, if you just if it's not about I'm the performer and I want everyone to click the like button because I'm so great, if you turn it into this is an ongoing discussion with my audience, I am pulling them into an experience with me, then anyone can build an audience.
Why do we struggle with this idea of experience, like pulling people in to experience? And you highlighted two different people there. There's one perspective is, well, I'm just awesome and I'm going to work really hard on it. So I'm going to put it out there and everybody's going to like it, versus another perspective, which is, how do I pull people in? How do I invite people into a story? How do I go together with them? Why do we struggle with the go together piece?
Few reasons. One, it's just not what most people were taught to do. Again, I learned this from people who've been really influential in building the creator economy in YouTube, and they're just ahead of the curve on this stuff. So it's just LinkedIn has just not gotten there yet. It's also about you're taught in school to do beginning, middle, and end, and you start with the exposition, and that's bad for the scroll. I always tell people, start in the middle. You start in the middle, the audience doesn't care who you are. I wish they would Google me. They would find all sorts of wonderful things. Nobody Googles anything. So if you just start in the middle of a situation with a compelling line of dialogue, they're just who is there? Oh, all right, let's see where this is going. And yeah, people, again, they don't really focus on the audience. Everybody, when you're talking about creators, they just point to the personality and how much money they made or how big their following is. And the one last piece of the puzzle, I think, and sorry to all the CEOs in your audience, but CEOs are not as good at speaking as they think they are, or corporate executives are not as good at storytelling as they think they are. And they used to be spoiled because we were all in offices and they could just shut the door and talk for 2 hours and nobody could leave or even like really go to the bathroom because you got to sit there and watch the boss, even if he's boring. Like on the internet, it doesn't matter how powerful you are. If people aren't compelled by your message, they're going to start checking other tabs. And like they haven't had to get people's attention. Whereas like I've had to be out on the streets flagging down tourists so I could sell tickets to my improv show. And like, I'm just used to like, you have to fight to earn the attention. If you're a successful person who runs a big company and you've got thousands of employees answering to you, or even a few dozen employees answering to you, like you can trick yourself into thinking like, oh, I'm just a really compelling storyteller because like, look at me, I'm telling a story. And it's like, they don't actually seek out whether or not they're good at this because they might not like the results of like hearing that like, no, actually you droned on for 40 minutes before you got to the point. And like this 5-minute anecdote you told could have been a 30-second one.
And so you were talked a couple of times about improv, and you know, what happens in improv if someone drones on too long?
Well, you're not supposed to. I was always taught if somebody
has it ever happened?
Oh yeah, there's a guy Matt Castelvi who's one of my good friends. He's pretty successful stand-up now. We would call it Castelvi logging back when I used to improvise with him. We're like, oh, nice Castelvi log there. I was taught by a teacher that if words fail, like physicality helps. So if someone's talking too much, it'd be like, you know, put my hands on them, like, my son, come with me, you know, and kind of change the energy that way. Actually, one thing that I think is super helpful that I learned in improv. So in improv, you don't tell jokes, you give gifts.
What does that mean?
I was taught you give gifts one line at a time.
Okay, cool.
So the idea, so improv is built on this foundational rule called yes and.
Okay.
And that means when somebody says anything, you have to agree to the initiation that they just made, and you add one more thing onto it. So if someone comes down and they're like, son, I've got the cookies ready. That's your mom, and she made cookies. You can't be like, those aren't cookies. That's dog poo. Like, that's your mom. She made you cookies. Now you got to add one thing onto it. You'd be like, don't forget the milk. Or, you know, or you could be like, oh, that's so sweet, mom. I wish I made you something. Or whatever it is, you got to accept the gift and then give another gift. And it's yes and, because the and is just as important as the yes. So it's not enough to just accept a gift from another improviser. You have to add something onto it. And this is how I teach sales too, because salespeople will run through their product demo. There'll be 200 bullet points in that presentation. And I'm like, hey, there's 200 bullet points in there. Maybe only 3 of them resonate with your audience. That's enough. That's enough. You got to hone in on what they care about. And when I'm doing like a speech, if somebody hires me to do like an in-person training, I actually demonstrate this concept because I walk around and I throw a ball to the audience to kind of show them how it works, you know? So I'll be like, yeah, this is about giving gifts, you know, and I'll like ask a question and I'll throw the ball to somebody and they'll answer it and they'll throw it back to me and I'll catch it. I'll go, did you notice how I didn't have to tell them I'm about to throw a ball to you? Like that was just the natural rhythm. They just kind of like said their thing and threw it back. That's because we have this instinctive want to play a game. And actually behind me, if you see, if anybody's like watching the video version of this, I have all sorts of visual gifts behind me in my shot. I've got a saxophone, I've got a clarinet, I've got board games, I've got The Simpsons, I've got books. That's me giving gifts to my audience. And very often I'll start a sales call and the first thing somebody will say to me is, I used to play saxophone. And I think of it as like leaving like a thread sticking out of your sweater and just waiting for the person who's going to pull on it. And this is a cold calling tactic too. I would do things like if, you know, you ask somebody how their day is going and they say, oh, that's great. How are you? I would always say something about food because that's a gift. Someone would be like, oh, how are you doing? I go, you know what? I just ate a sleeve of Girl Scout cookies for breakfast. Wasn't supposed to do that. How's your morning going? Now, they might ignore that gift. They don't have to accept the gift. But some percentage of people are going to go, Girl Scout cookies. I like the Thin Mints. And they've just they're volleying the ball back to me. And it's like, yeah, you have this nice little interaction. It's like a little inside joke that you create on the spot. And then you segue to your next thing, you know, and the sales equivalent of this is like, you want the prospect to buy for their reasons, not yours. So the questions you ask, the different beats in your presentation, it should all be trying to get the person to arrive at the conclusion on their own. And yeah, I always say it's like, you can't throw everything at them at the same time. You throw one game move at them and then you see how it landed. And then you make the next move.
Sounds like feedback is really, really important throughout your process. Can you talk a little bit about how you gather feedback?
Yeah. So the easiest way is just to ask for it. And that sounds overly obvious, but this is not something most LinkedIn creators do. When I first started creating content on the platform, I asked everybody for feedback if they interacted with it. If people were clicking the like button, people were leaving a comment, I would just DM them and be like, hey, thanks for interacting with the post. I'm trying to improve things. Like, would you mind sharing if there was anything particular you liked about it? And that was really helpful because in the beginning, I was doing like more kind of straightforward talking head videos about sales concepts. But I would sometimes have a little moment where I like cut away and it was like a cold calling example. And it was like me nervous on a phone and like a much angrier version of me that didn't want to talk to me. And everybody was like, that little cutaway thing you did there was really, I would like to see more of that. And I realized after getting enough feedback, like, oh no, this is everybody. Sales leaders, SDRs, my comedian friends, other creators, like corporate executives, entrepreneurs, everybody, when I ask them, they like the comedy. It's not too strange. It's not inappropriate for the venue. That's actually what they like. And that allowed me to know that it was safe to put more of that into the content. And I'd also say asking different types of people for feedback is so helpful, especially if you're doing your stuff on LinkedIn. Every interesting thing I'm doing on LinkedIn, I learned outside of LinkedIn. So if you have friends who went to film school, if you have friends who are TikTokers or YouTubers, like get feedback from a variety of people. Because some of those early conversations just changed my life. And they're like, oh, like I had one, I was talking to like, a film creator, he does a lot of short films and stuff. And he was like, oh, this is good. There's too much of a gap between your characters are talking. And it's because you're laying them on the timeline, one clip right after the other. If you have a little bit of overlap where we start hearing the next line slightly before we see it, it's just going to feel like a smoother, more real kind of conversation. And yeah, I got all these wonderful notes that nobody on LinkedIn ever tells you about. And again, that's why I made this business in the first place, is because I looked at who was giving advice on LinkedIn. I'm like, well, that's literally just wrong. So I'm going to go out and do it this other way that my friends have become very successful at. And like, if I can make it engaging enough, it's going to be more fun than what other people are doing. And if you're having more fun, people are going to want to come along for the ride.
What's an example of something that people are advising people to do that's just flat out wrong? And you don't have to get into names of who's advising it, but what's an example that hasn't come up yet about what people are suggesting that you do? The gurus are saying do it, but it's just flat out wrong.
Yeah, I saw one the other day where it was like, they were like, you need to be faker on camera. You need to have bigger facial expressions. You need to be louder. You need to use more hand gestures. And I'm like, all of that stuff is really off-putting to an audience. Ask any film director who's ever had to direct a Broadway actor. The challenge is you've got to dial them back on video. They're too big. Again, you are not on a stage 200 feet away from your audience. You are inches away from their face. It is a more intimate style of performance. Like, I coach people to talk to the audience like you're sitting across the table with them drinking coffee, because you are. The last thing I'll say is never lie. Never lie. People will sometimes embellish stories to make them more interesting. But what's interesting is the boring details. That's what rings true. And the camera is a lie detector. If you're lying, people don't realize they have tells. But like, you can often tell when people are lying. And it's like, again, the example I use is like, if you're an SDR and like, you're not really good at cold calling and you're like, here's my 5 secrets for cold calling success, nobody's going to want to watch your video, because nobody's like, oh man, I just need 5 cold calling tips. That's what I'm looking for today. But if you go out there and you're like, look, I'm going to be real with you. I'm an SDR and I've always struggled with hitting my dials. So what I'm going to do is every day this week, I'm going to promise to make 100 dials. and I'm going to report back to you at 5 o'clock to let you know whether I did it. And if you're a sales pro who's good at cold calling, if you want to leave some tips in the comments here to help me out, I could sure use it. That's going to be a well-performing video because you're coming in as yourself. You're coming in as a real person. You're creating a situation where success is not guaranteed. And now your audience can weigh in with their expertise. They can weigh in as the person who's going to be helpful. They can provide their knowledge. They can feel seen and acknowledged and important. And you've just created an experience with them. Yeah, and hey, maybe you'll actually make your fucking dials and maybe you actually won't miss your quota again. Wouldn't that be something?
Absolutely awesome. Chris, where can people find out more about you and how to potentially work with you as a coach? Where would you like to send folks?
Yeah. So if anybody wants to buy my digital course, The Complete Guide to Selling on Video, they can do that at chrisbogue.io. So it's me going deep on my video processes. I only made this course because my coaching clients were telling me, please release this as a course because, again, there's a lot of moving parts to video. We cover on-camera performance. We cover like the sales strategy. We cover list building. We cover like script writing for all areas of the pipeline, not just cold outreach, but mid-pipeline and referrals as well. It's editing, it's subtitling, it's outbound for LinkedIn and Gmail. If you really want to get started on video for sales and you don't know where to start, go to chrisbogue.io, get the complete guide to selling on video. Also, if you just want to hear more from me, you can find me on LinkedIn. Just go search Chris Bogue. I create new content every day. A lot of it has comedy in it, so like that's a great place to experience me. Go send me a connection request. I'm not shy. I will connect with you. And then, yeah, you can also listen to my show. I do a show every 2 weeks on LinkedIn Live called Chris Sells His Soul. It's conversations about how to monetize creativity. So sometimes I'm talking to creative people who monetize themselves. Sometimes I'm talking with sales leaders and marketing leaders about how we can utilize more creativity in the sales and marketing process. But you can find that every other Thursday on LinkedIn at 6 p.m. Central. And you can find episodes wherever you listen to podcasts. So I also release that as an audio episode. Go search for Chris Sells His Soul on Apple or Spotify or Google or wherever you get podcasts. You will recognize a lot of big creators on there. And yeah, we really go deep on this stuff all the time.
Awesome. We'll include links in the show notes. I've got one more question. Is there a difference between subtitles and captions? Like, are there ways to use, are they one and the same, or can you use them? I know there's some
sort of difference. I think it's like closed captions, like you can turn them off and on.
Okay.
So that's like if you upload the .srt file and the audience has the chance to put them in. Subtitles are just burned in. Okay. I do that for my prospecting videos for sales. I'm one of the only people who does that. I burn the captions directly into the video file because I want people to be able to watch me even if I'm on mute. And that's a little tidbit I'll leave with. If you ever watch my comedy videos, the captions are funny too because I write them myself and I time the captions so they read exactly the way the punchline sounds.
Absolutely freaking awesome. Chris, we're going to have to do another episode at some point in time because I want to go deeper into improv, and this will ultimately turn this into a 2-hour podcast. We've already run a bit long. Chris, thanks for being on the show. If you know someone who would gain value out of listening to this, enjoy the conversation, please share it with them via LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, wherever you share. Let Chris and I know that you've shared it. Sales is a thinking process. Business is a thinking process. Life is a thinking process. How are you thinking differently about your process?